I'm finding I do 5 minutes of reading in a book of choice at the beginning of class every day, and more kids are reading off the Kindle, we got a few of them reading off the iPhone. You know, they got the book on there with real small print. They seem to like it. Any others? Go ahead.
Online learning.
Online learning, awesome. Yeah, all possibilities. Here's our journey to literacy, kind of the roadmap for today. I'm going to talk a little bit about some founding principles, hopefully make this pretty quick, because really what we want to get into for the main part of the session is 10 or so tested techniques that we've been using in the classroom to incorporate technology and literacy, and that's really where the students come on. Each student will be talking about one or two different subjects. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end, so we'd love for you to hold your questions until then. And on the way out, we've got an exit. So if you see the clickers on your table, if you haven't had a chance to use those before, maybe you'll enjoy seeing those and seeing how they work. So, first point here, if you think back to your teacher education classes, you might remember this concept of Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. And basically, and this philosophy is rooted kind of in three different areas. On the one end, you've got material that's too easy for a student at some time. They already know it, right? They're not going to be engaged. On the other end, you've got material that's at the frustrational level. It's too hard for a given student to learn at that point. In between, you kind of got this thin line where learning takes place, this zone of proximal development. And this is something that we'll come back to later in a hypothesis. We also have some new definitions of literacy coming out here. First one, this is the NCTE as early as 2008. So in the world of technology, 3 years ago is actually quite a while ago. They're thinking about these things. Can I get a volunteer to maybe read this out loud, either off the screen or off of your handout? Go for it.
As society's technology changed, so does literacy. Because technology has increased the intensity and complexity of literate environments, the 21st century demands that a literate person possess a wide range of abilities and competencies, many literacies. Those literacies, from reading online newspapers to participating in virtual classrooms, are multiple, dynamic, and valuable.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. So really what this tells me is that literacy, of course, is always rooted in reading a book, writing on a piece of paper, typing out a written piece. But there's a lot more that goes into it now. I think I would even go so far as to say is being able to use something like a social network, Facebook, or using Google programs. You can call that literacy. You know, if you think about corporate world, everyone's using Facebook, Twitter, other things like that for marketing, for business purposes. Knowing that literacy is important. Another one, today's digital technologies are tools of creativity and speech, a new literacy for a new generation. And I think that these are things that we need to keep in mind really all through the levels of education. Another important idea, medium is the message. And this is just kind of the thought that what we do in the classroom, the way that we do things, sends a message and makes a difference. We see here we've got Jake riding a bike. His bike is connected to a machine that runs this battery and then powers a computer and a TV. The medium is the message here, right? What he's doing makes a difference. Teenage brain, version 2.0. Teenage brain here is changing. We texted it out. This is something that I'm hearing more and more. So last year I took my class on a field trip. Two teenage students, sophomores, were in an argument, right? Arguments between sophomores have been happening since the beginning of time. In the past, it's been, all right, let's talk this out. Or you know, maybe we'll get a friend here to help us figure it out. These students on the bus, they're literally riding the same bus, sitting 6 feet from each other. Instead of talking about it, they figured it out over text message. Two kids on the same bus. I mean, they literally could have turned and spoken to each other, but instead they're texting back and forth here. Excuse Wyatt's cry here. This is my 5-week-old son. I can only imagine what he's going to be doing in technology, you know, when he's these guys' age. We have no idea. But anyway, we texted it out. I'm also hearing things like, we figured it out over G-Chat. When I mentioned this to the students yesterday, they nod their heads, right? Figuring out problems, communications over these means of technology. I've got a little video here for you that kind of speaks to the ways that the teenage brain is changing here.
The average young person today spends nearly 9 hours each day with their technology. We add it all up. That's a lot of time. This is a big concern. You have young people whose brains are not fully developed. So what will happen with these digital natives who have grown up with this technology, who are great and efficient in using it? What will they be like in 20, 30 years? Will they have fewer empathy skills? Will they have trouble putting together the big picture? Those are some of the concerns I have.
Does this have a more profound effect on young developing brains than on older, more established brains?
I think the effect is much more profound in a young developing brain. We know that a young brain goes through a process called pruning, which basically means that from early life through adolescence, 60% of the synaptic connections between the brain cells are pruned away. So how a young person chooses to spend their time, what they expose their brains to, will have a profound effect on what their brain will be like for the rest of their lives.
And this is stuff that's pruned away forever.
That's right.
All right, so this from PBS Frontline's Digital Nation. This whole thing's online. I highly recommend checking it out when you have a chance. And I think there's some significant implications here. Obviously, so on the one hand, young minds are being reprogrammed. You spend 9 hours a day interacting with technology. That's going to change the way that your brain works. Means of communication and learning are altered. On the one hand, if I think this really kind of speaks to something that we'll get back to at the end of the presentation, that the high-touch interpersonal means of communication that we have in the classroom, I think that's more and more important. The handshake, the eye contact, the how you doing, the one-on-one conference with a student about their work, that becomes ever more important. But then, on the other hand, if we don't dial in, if we don't start using this means of communication and learning that students are accustomed to, they're going to turn out. Or, excuse me, they're going to tune out. We're going to lose them. Final point here. Daniel H. Pink's Drive. Anyone read this? Yeah? It sounds like you liked it. Yeah, incredible book. It's not necessarily about education, but it is about education. Very much so. The surprising truth behind what motivates us. And he basically says that 3 things, autonomy, mastery, and purpose, are what motivates people. If you think about yourself in your own work, in your personal life, this may kind of speak to you. And these are things, since I read this, I'm really just trying to think about how can I get these into the classroom. And I think that technology, in some ways, will allow us to do that. So, here's my hypothesis. We've got the zone of proximal development. In other words, the rate of learning, you could say. If the medium is the message and literacy includes new digital media skills, then I really think that the progress of the zone of proximal development, in other words, the rate of learning, the rate of advancement forward, can be accelerated when we use technology in the classroom. I also think that it speaks to differentiated instruction, so that we're hitting each student at his or her zone of proximal development. Going back to Pink, he says they're Goldilocks tasks. They're not too hard, they're not too easy, they're just right. Right? And I don't know if he had Vygotsky in mind, but that's basically what he's talking about here, are these Goldilocks tasks. And then I just added this last bit, motivation will follow. I think that if we include these pieces, students really will be motivated. You'll see from the FedEx day that we did in class last week, kids were engaged. They were dialed in. They were interested. So that's enough from me. We'll turn it over to the students. Alex is up first. He'll be speaking about the multimedia, multiple intelligences, reader response piece. Alex, come on up.
Okay, so I'm Alex, and then we did multimedia in class to help us learn better. So in my example, we started with a synthesis paper, which I think you guys have in your packet, and we did that off of Brave New World. And then also we compared it with the movie Gattaca, which is about utopians and dystopians. Then we chose another book from what we wanted to relate to, and I chose 1984. my common theme for the synthesis paper was to do like how all the governments were very similar in a communist, I guess, fascist way. So first we wrote the paper.